Okay, so hopefully in the yesterday's lesson I explained what will be happening today. Obviously I'm away. What we're going to have a go at is trying to understand the national minimum wage. Now, a long time ago, and you've probably forgotten that, we had a look at labour markets. And in labour markets, we tried to show what determines the equilibrium wage in different occupations, and we compared doctors and nurses. So the first thing I'd like you to do is grab a whiteboard and try and show, try and remember what does the labour market diagram look like. Yeah, so it should have demand for labour and supply of labour. See if you can remember what goes on the axis, and then explain to somebody near you who it is, so why it is that demand slopes the way it does, and why it is that supply slopes the way it does, and why wages at the equilibrium level. Now you can do this in 4 groups of 2 or 2 groups of 4. I'm not too bothered. So what you should have is something that looks like this. Beautiful pinky purple pen, courtesy of my daughter. So what you got is, on the left hand, on the vertical axis, you've got the wage rate, probably per hour. On the horizontal axis, I'm having trouble getting this lined up, is the quantity of labour. So the demand for labour slopes downwards from left to right, because as wage rates, as wage rates rise, what happens is that the demand for labour falls. So we end up at a lower level of demand the higher the wage rates, and that's because firms can't afford to pay such high wage rates. On the other hand, the supply of labour increases. The higher the wage rate, and the further along to the right the supply of labour is, because more people are prepared to get off their bottoms and go out and look for a job. So that's your basic starting point. So what we're going to be thinking about today is the idea of a national minimum wage. So the national minimum wage was introduced in 1999, and back then it was about £3 an hour. And now, as things stand, it's about £6.70 an hour, and the government's proposed a national living wage for the over 25s that's going to be something like £7.30 an hour. So what I'd like you to do is, if you imagine in your diagram that the equilibrium wage rate is relatively low, I'd like you to try and adapt your diagram to show the effect of a national minimum wage imposed by the government in the market at above the current equilibrium wage rate. So have a go and try and work out what it is that you think is happening in that diagram. I should have said pause the video at that point. I should have said that before the last one, but anyway, never mind. So if you pause now. So what you should have is something that looks a bit like this, probably without the smiley and unsmiley faces. So what we got is that way, and what we got is we've got a national minimum wage at £6.70. So what's happened firstly is that the demand for labour has fallen. We shouldn't have shifts because we just got a change in the price of the product. In this case, the product is labour. So what we got is that the demand for labour has fallen from Q1 to Q2. Those people are very unhappy, because they used to have a job paying W1, and now they don't have a job at all, so they're unemployed. On the other hand, OQ2 people are pretty happy. They've still got their jobs, but now, they're very unhappy now because I put my finger over their heads. But now, what we've got is they've got an increase. That box there shows the increase in their wages. Each one of those workers has a higher wage than they did before. And there's some straight-faced people over there, Q1, Q3. Because what they did is they went out to look for a job. They thought, oh, minimum wage, £6.70, brilliant. They went out to look for a job, and they realised there weren't any, so then they went and got back on their bottoms and sat in front of daytime television again. So we've got 3 groups of workers, roughly speaking. So in diagrammatic terms, you've got, it's pretty simple. It's very much like the guaranteed minimum price diagram, except that obviously there's no guarantee of employment, which is why there are some unhappy bods here. So some workers are happy, because they've still got their jobs at a higher wage. Some people have got, some people have lost their jobs, so they're pretty unhappy, and then some people are fairly straight-faced. So the idea of the minimum wage, obviously, was to try to increase the wages of the very poorest members of society. So partly this is a way of tackling inequality, and partly it's creating incentives to work, and so on. So what I'd like you to do now is, if you haven't already done so, log on to Firefly, and there you'll find a couple of videos. So if you go to somewhere near the top, I haven't made this yet, so I can't remember exactly what it's going to look like, but somewhere near the top there should be there should be a page that says, F1 8th of March lesson or something. And in there's a couple of videos that I'd like you to watch about the national minimum wage. So pause me, switch over to Firefly, and have a look at those videos. So hopefully you've now had a look at those. Yeah. So what I'd like you now to think about is. John should have given you some pieces of paper. One should look a bit like that one, and then there should be a set of three that go together, looking like that. Yeah. So in your pairs and small groups, or small groups depending on how you're doing it. Yeah. Firstly, just have a quick look at that one and get a sense of what's been going on in the UK, in the UK over the last 10 years or so, and being how the UK compares with the rest of the world. What I'd then like you to do is, these are, what you've got here is actually two separate articles, one of which is broadly in favour, one of which is broadly against the minimum wage. What I'd like you to do, thinking about that, thinking about this, and also thinking about what you just watched in the two videos, what I'd like you to do is to take this one and see whether you can bullet point the main benefits and limitations of the minimum wage. So if you pause me there and have a go at that for, I don't know, as long as it takes, 5 or 10 minutes, something like that. Okay, so having done that, what I'd like you to do is, depending on whether you're pairs and groups, I'd like you to share your ideas and attempt to discuss between you what you think. Whether you think an increase in the whether you think an increase in the minimum wage to £6.70 an hour is a good idea, and secondly, whether you think the government's national living wage of £7.30 an hour for over 25s is that a good idea. So pause me there, and if you haven't already had a discussion, exchange some views and decide what it is that you think about that. Okay, so I've got a second question for you that I'm going to ask you, which is, we know that the national minimum wage rate is banded. You can see it on this one. You can now anyway. That the adult rate is higher than the 18 to 20-year-old rate, and the 16 to 17-year-old rate is lower than that. Well, the question I've got for you is, who do you think that's intended to benefit? So again, can you come up with 2 or 3 reasons that you think that system is banded? So pause for me now and see why you think it is that that younger workers have a lower minimum wage than older workers. Pause now and see if you can come up with 2 or 3, and once you come up with it, make me play again. Okay, so if you haven't had the chance to already, just briefly exchange your ideas, and pause me again if you haven't had a chance to chat. Okay, so the standard argument here actually is that the reason that younger workers are paid a lower minimum wage is actually to give them a chance. If you've got the chance of employing an older worker for, say, £6 an hour, or a younger worker at £6 an hour, you'll probably go for the older worker as a firm. And the reason is they've got more experience, they're more productive, they're less likely to have a hangover, and therefore, fundamentally, you're going to get better workers. So what's going to persuade you to take on some snotty 17-year-old? The answer is, if they're cheap, then maybe we'll bring them into the workforce. So that works to their advantage in the sense that, firstly, obviously they get a job and have some money, but secondly, it kind of breaks the no experience, no job, no job, no experience, no experience, no job, no job, no experience cycle. And there's another argument, really, which is that actually their living costs are probably lower, so in some sense it's fairer. It is an argument, it's fairer to give older workers a higher wage. And the similar argument applies to the government's national living wage for the over 25s. These people aren't living at home, probably, at least, I hope not. I hope my children still living at home when they're 25. But yeah, so therefore they need more money. Of course, the argument is that that actually this may work against those sorts of workers, and it may be 23, 24-year-olds who get employed. But if you look at the data, in fact, it's that group 16 to 25-year-olds that actually have the much higher unemployment rate. So the arguments are: one, it helps younger workers to get into the workforce, allowing them to earn some money because they're not as productive. Secondly, it gives them a chance to build up skills, and thirdly, they don't really need they don't really need a minimum wage, because they're probably living at home. So those are the arguments there. And again, we'll summarise some of this stuff later. And that was my daughter, I think, that you saw wandering in through the door in the background there. Okay, so returning to the idea of a national minimum wage in general. When we think about the points that you've got on both sides, in terms of the arguments in favour, so you should have arguments in favour, arguments against, and reasons why it doesn't really matter. In terms of arguments in favour, you've probably got the argument that it helps to reduce inequality within society. So the very poorest members of society should have higher wages. So that's one big argument. A second argument is that it may actually force firms to make better use of their workforce. So if I'm going to have to pay you £6.70 an hour, then I'm probably going to have to train you as well. So a third argument is that this is debatable because a lot depends on the elasticity of demand for labour. But a third argument is that by giving people more money, they may spend it, and as a result, consumption may rise within the economy. It's an argument. Obviously, the extent to which that's going to happen depends on whether too many people lose their jobs. So a lot of the arguments in favour of the minimum wage are pretty much to do with fairness, equality, supporting the living standards of the very poorest members of society, that type of thing. When you come to the other side, it's generally easier to come up with quite a few arguments, and often these are linked. They're kind of more macro arguments. Another argument in favour, obviously, is that it creates incentives to work. So by driving up the minimum wage, you may increase your participation rate. I think in one of the documents it talked about the idea that we're going to reduce voluntary unemployment. So what it's doing is reducing what's called the replacement ratio, which is kind of the gap between the wage that you can earn and benefit levels. Obviously, that could also be achieved by reducing benefit levels, but this is a kind of way of doing it. So again, there is some sort of argument that by getting more people into the workforce, it could help to support potential growth. It's an argument. The arguments against tend to centre around the key policy objectives. So obviously, the first thing is there's a danger that unemployment is going to increase. You saw it on your diagram that the demand for labour falls, more people enter the workforce, and therefore we may end up with unemployment. How much is going to depend on how much the minimum wage goes up by and so on. But fundamentally, there is a risk of unemployment. Secondly, there's also a danger that inflation is going to be driven up in two main ways. So one is through the wage price spiral, that if we drive up wages, firms' costs increase. Firms' costs increase, they're going to have to pass it on in the form of higher prices. Although I think one of the women in the video was arguing that the businesswoman was arguing that she can't pass on the pay rise, so the increase in her costs to the consumer. So she's either going to get back to unemployment, or alternatively her profits are cut and there may be less funds for investment, which then counteracts the productivity argument that we made a minute ago. Thirdly, if costs are driven up, that may and it causes inflation, that may damage your international competitiveness as well. Because you saw from the other table, the minimum wage table, that the UK's minimum wage is one of the highest in the world. So therefore, again, there is a danger that you're gonna damage your ability to compete on world markets. So, another argument is that it leads to inflation is the argument that if we increase the pay of the people at the very bottom of the pay pyramid, everybody above them will also demand pay rises. So it's not just confined to the people on the minimum wage. That people will want to maintain what are called differentials. So if the supervisor was on £6.80 an hour and their workers are on £5, and we then pay the workers £6.70, then obviously the supervisor wants a pay rise. There are also some arguments that suggest that the minimum wage might not have very much effect. So, in reality, there's only about 1.3 million workers who are actually on the minimum wage, and so it's only affecting a relatively small number of jobs. Secondly, when the economy is growing, it probably doesn't matter. So even if people lose their jobs, as long as the economy is growing, then these people will find new jobs elsewhere. So in other words, we can have a win-win. When the economy is doing badly, then that argument is more mute. But as long as demand, in diagrammatic terms, as long as demand is shifting to the right, then what we're going to find is that people are going to find jobs. A third argument is that it depends on the elasticity of demand for labour. and supply. In other words, if we can't really substitute away from workers, then what you'll find is that actually unemployment doesn't go up. And I'll draw you another diagram now. So in this case, the demand for labour hasn't fallen particularly quickly. Supply hasn't increased because workers aren't particularly prepared to come into work. Maybe maybe there's problems with the benefit levels are too high and so on. So the impact of the national minimum wage. I mean, we haven't seen mass unemployment. So since the minimum wage was introduced, in reality, unemployment continued to fall throughout that period. Obviously, during the financial crisis, maybe it probably did cause some job losses. But it's important to remember that it's linked. The impact of the national minimum wage is confined to workers at the bottom of the pay pyramid. Probably even if they were to lose their jobs, they wouldn't actually get much less, but by going on benefits. So arguably, what it's done is it's stopped the real exploitation of desperate workers, and that's the argument. So I don't know how we're doing in terms of lesson, I've kind of lost track of what I'm doing to some extent here, So it may be that we're reaching towards the end. But if you want some notes, so if it's the end of the lesson, fine, and we can pick up some notes tomorrow. Otherwise, we can have a go at some notes if you like, that just sum up the idea of the national minimum wage. So if you want to have a go at that, if you pause now, get your books out, and I probably won't do the advantages and disadvantages, but we can maybe set out the framework. Okay, so here's the first one. There we go. No, out a bit. There we go. Right. So, national minimum wage, as it says there, is the legal minimum hourly wage that can be paid to UK workers. It was introduced. Which way do I go, left or right? It was introduced in 1999 by Blair, and rates. In fact, the minimum wage rates are determined by the Independent Low Pay Commission. Although, as one of those videos was arguing. Some people argue this is much too low and that it doesn't actually get anywhere near to a living wage. And by that I don't mean the national minimum wage. I mean there's a living wage foundation type group, who calculate what's really needed, and that's what that woman was moaning on about, about how she can never go out to eat. And that rate is much higher. I think it's somewhere up towards about £9 an hour. Anyway, so if you stick that down, and then you can pause me if you want. I'm going to write another one now. So as things stand, come here. As things stand, there are 3 bands for the national minimum wage, as you can see there. 21-year-olds get £6.70 an hour, 18 to 20-year-olds £5.30 an hour, and 16 to 70-year-olds a mere £3.87. I should say per hour. It's not just £3.87 full stop. And the government recently announced, a bit of a gimmick probably, but a national living wage for 25-plus-year-olds. At the moment it makes no real difference. £7.20 an hour doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But eventually that is going to rise probably much faster than the national minimum wage, because the national minimum wage is set by the Low Pay Foundation, whereas the government has in principle committed to increasing this national living wage thing to £9 an hour, eventually over 4 years from now. Pause me there, you can pause me there if you like. So why are there 3 bands on the national minimum wage? There are 3 main reasons. Another one of which I thought about as I was writing this. So the first one is to protect low-paid workers. In fact, their lower minimum wage is designed actually to help them to get into work. They don't have much experience. They can't prove that they've got a track record. There's a degree of information asymmetry here. In the sense that firms would probably prefer to go to somebody who has already had a job and can prove that they've done it. So therefore they need to be cheaper to be able to get a job, and as I said earlier, that helps to break the no job, no experience, no job cycle, and it gives these low-paid workers, it gives these people an income, so therefore they can go out and spend. Again, you can pause that there for a minute, and I'll put the other 2 reasons on a new slide. And then my other 2 reasons then are, one we've already mentioned, stupid board, one I've already mentioned, which is that obviously the living costs of 16 to 17-year-olds are much lower. So there's a fairness issue here. We argued that 22, 23, 25-year-olds so on probably not living at home. So they have higher living expenses. So therefore we're trying to help out 16 to 17-year-olds. Sorry, no, we're not. The 16 to 17-year-olds don't need it. And thirdly, one I just thought of, or just remembered rather, is that by keeping the wages of these low-paid workers, the guaranteed wages, low, it gives them an incentive, to stay in education. So in theory, that should lead to a better skilled workforce. Eventually, once they come out of education, assuming that education does what we want it to, and gives people the skills they need. So that's the framework. I think the advantages and disadvantages will come on to when I see you on Thursday. I don't know how the lesson has gone. As ever, do send me some feedback. Keep your sheets, where you put your plus and minus points on them, and we'll use that for the starting point on the lesson on Thursday. I hope this has vaguely worked out. Anyway, I'm sure you'll let me know. I'm sure you'll let me know if it hasn't. So fingers crossed. Again, sorry I'm not here with you today. But I'll see you all on Thursday. Thanks for playing nicely, and I'll see you then.